Good evening, everyone. We're going to give just a minute or so for people to all get logged in. And in the meantime, if you want to let us know that you're here and give us a wave, that would be great. You can do that in the questions section. You can just say hello and let us know where you're joining us from this evening. We'd love to know who's here. But we're just going to give this a minute longer just so we let everyone get into the room here, and then we will get started. See, we're getting some people coming now. I see some new people, and I see some people who come to a lot of our webinars, so it's nice to see everyone. Okay, well, while everybody is joining, I will go ahead. I need to make a few announcements, and then we will get started. So good evening and welcome to our webinar this evening. My name is Amy Onder. I'm the president and CEO of the Lupus Foundation of America Heartland chapter. And if you're new to our organization, we are headquartered in St. Louis, but we cover the state of Missouri, Southern Illinois up to Springfield, and the state of Kansas. So hopefully you are in our chapter territory, but if you're not, we're glad you're here as well. Again, if you're comfortable letting us know you're here, you can give us a little wave and let us know that you are here, or you can type something in the questions section. Before we get started, I just want to make a few announcements, and then we'll get started. I want to remind you of a couple upcoming programs. On Thursday, November the 18th, we have a webinar, Bringing the Fight to Lupus Nephritis. This is from 6:30 to 7:30. And nephrologist Dr. Abdul Latif with Baylor College of Medicine is going to be joining us to discuss lupus nephritis and a new treatment option that was just passed by the FDA recently. We're very excited that several new drugs have come through the pipeline and are now available through the FDA. And so if you're interested in that topic at all, we really encourage you to attend so you can learn the specifics about how the medication works and if it's right for you. And then on December the 9th, we have a webinar, Let's Talk About It, which is our webinar series, and that is Tools for Managing Stress and Thriving Through the Holidays. And that a best-selling author and motivational speaker, Dr. Adair F. White Johnson, will be joining us, and she's going to share some tips, tools, and strategies for thriving during the holiday season with lupus. And if you're interested in connecting with other people who are living with lupus, we invite you to join our monthly online support group. It meets the second Thursday of each month, which happens to be this coming Thursday. So if you're interested in meeting other people living with lupus, we encourage you to join our support group. You can find information about all of these programs at our website, which is lupus.org/heartland. And if you're looking for any other information, that's a great place to go, information about lupus. You can also find tonight's presentation is being recorded, and once it's been approved, we will load it to our YouTube channel where you can watch it again. So if you had questions or you want to look back at something, you can go back and take a look. So it will be there probably in the next couple of days. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to remind you that the information provided in the webinar is for general informational and educational purposes only. It doesn't replace any kind of advice or information that you get from your own physician. Tonight's program, as I said, will be on YouTube, and if you have any questions during tonight's webinar, just type them in the questions section that you see on the side of your screen, and our presenter will try to answer as many questions as she can at the end of her presentation. So feel free to ask them throughout the presentation, then we will hold the questions until the end. So without further ado, I'm happy to turn this over to our presenter, Paula Morgan. She's a return to work case manager at Allsup Employment Services, a national Social Security Administration authorized employment network. Allsup is a longtime supporter of the Lupus Foundation America Heartland chapter. You've probably seen them at all of our walks for many, many years, and we really appreciate their partnership in presenting this webinar. So Paula, I will turn it over to you.
Sounds great. I can't thank you both enough. Good evening, I guess I should start off with. Good evening, everybody. I certainly can't thank Amy and Becca enough for inviting us tonight. I'm excited to be able to talk with all of you, and it sounds like you've got some really exciting, some really helpful webinars coming up. And so I'm hoping that you also find that this information that we share tonight is as helpful as some of the webinars that you have coming up. So a little bit more about me. Again, my name is Paula Morgan, and I've been working within the Social Security disability industry for a little more than 18 years. And for the most part, I've worked for the agency that initiates the disability adjudication when you originally apply for Social Security disability. Did a couple of years with them. And then I also spent quite a bit of time working at the administrative law judge level of disability. So I was both an advocate and a representative for people who'd applied for, been denied a couple of times, and then finally had a chance to be evaluated, be heard by the administrative law judge level. I spent a lot of time assisting and advocating and representing those individuals. About 6 years ago, my focus shifted from assisting people getting awarded that Social Security disability benefit to helping people return to work. And specifically, I've been helping individuals make that transition from being solely reliant or solely dependent on that Social Security disability benefit to trying to return to work. And it's been an exceptionally rewarding experience for me. It's been great knowing that I can help people find either a new path for employment or perhaps revisit a previous employer that they worked for prior to their disability. So that's been very exciting. It's also been exciting for me to help people navigate the intricacies, the rules, the regulations that you have to go through with Social Security in terms of making that transition from being someone that's on the disability benefit to someone that wants to return to work. And I know over the many years that I've been working within this industry, but specifically returning to work, I've spent a lot of time helping people return to work that have had either an acute illness or an acute injury, and they're able to recover from that injury or illness, and they've been able to go back to work, and that's great. But in many of the other cases that I've worked with many of the other people that I've worked for, that return to work, when they make that attempt to return to work, oftentimes they're continuing to struggle with the effects of a chronic disability. And I've learned a great deal from folks like that. Like I said, it's been truly an amazing and a rewarding experience for me. I'd like to add at this point that my manager, my mentor, and my friend, Diane Winerski, is joining us this evening also as a panelist. Diane is a certified rehabilitation counselor. She's a certified disability management specialist. She's a certified case manager and a certified ergonomics specialist. She has an extensive history assisting people with disabilities overcome those obstacles and different challenges in returning to work, trying to re-enter the workforce. I've learned a great deal from Diane over the last several years, and I can't thank her enough for being on this webinar with us this evening. So, and Diane's pulling a little double duty as well. She's actually located out east. So for her, it's going on 8 o'clock. So I just want to thank Diane a great deal for sharing your knowledge and experience and your time with us.
You're very welcome, Paula.
All right, thank you. Just going to continue on. I know Amy talked a little bit about this before she introduced me, but I just wanted to ensure that everyone attending this presentation is aware that Allsup Employment Services is not a law firm. And so we would certainly encourage you to seek legal advice regarding any potential issue holding any kind of legal significance. All right. So I was contacted a couple months ago, and I was asked to provide a presentation based on an article of mine that appeared in Forbes back in August of 2021. And that article was titled Common Mistakes when Asking for Accommodations and How to Avoid Them. So in that column, I talked about a couple of things. There were some themes that we talked about. Number one was not knowing how to ask for an accommodation. Number two was not having the right documentation when you ask for that accommodation, right? And then number three was assuming employers will not offer that reasonable accommodation. So what we're going to do this evening, what I'd like to do this evening is obviously address these items, but also do a deeper dive into a few other items as we continue on. So I think it's important that we talk about the definition of disability. Having been in the Social Security disability industry for a long, long time, over 18 years, I've heard of a lot, many different definitions of disability over the years. So we're going to start talking about some of the more common definitions of disability. Something that I've often heard of throughout my tenure in the industry, and some of you might even be aware of, is short-term disability. Some employers often offer short-term disability as a benefit when you start with a new employer. Short-term disability is a private insurance benefit, and that can be either paid by the employee or the employer, and it's paid out to an employee typically when they're no longer able to perform the normal work duties of his or her job. And generally speaking, this is a short-term disability. So this is something that's generally going to last anywhere from 3 to 6 months. But again, every contract is different. But generally speaking, it runs usually 3 to 6 months. We've also talked about, or rather, I've also learned quite a lot about long-term disability benefits. Again, the long-term disability benefit is it's a private insurance benefit, once again, usually paid for with the employer. And it typically works in tandem with the short-term disability. And what I mean by that is, if you're on a short-term disability benefit, oftentimes a long-term disability carrier will reach out to you when your short-term disability benefit is about to expire or exhaust. And they'll recommend, hey, you might want to try to apply for your long-term disability. So once again, it's a private disability benefit, usually obtained through an employer. Generally speaking, long-term disability requires that an individual be unable to work their own occupation for a period of 24 months. And then the definition changes to any reasonable occupation. Another definition of disability is the Social Security's definition of disability. And this is the definition, this definition of disability really is what raised me professionally over the last 20 plus years in this industry. And what I can tell you based on my personal experience, this Social Security's definition of disability truly is the most strict version of disability. So Social Security defines disability as the inability to engage in substantial gainful activity due to a physical and or mental impairment that has lasted or is expected to last 12 consecutive months or result in death. So again, this is in my opinion, the most strict definition of disability out there. Social Security relies on hundreds of diagnoses combined with functional loss and substantiated by objective medical evidence as well as subjective complaints. So once again, this is a serious definition, very strict definition of disability. So I wanted to talk about those things, those definitions. What we're really here to talk about tonight, though, is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we have on the slide here. It was signed into law July 26, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. And in my opinion, and I think most people would agree with me, it truly is one of America's most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation that prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as individuals without disabilities. And the ADA definition is defined as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities a person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having that impairment. And the ADA, unlike Social Security's program in terms of disability, they don't really specifically name the impairments like Social Security does. Like I said earlier, Social Security provides literally hundreds of diagnoses that an individual can be awarded for. The ADA was written a bit more broadly. So I realized that it took a little bit of time to get through these various definitions of disability, but I thought it was worth our while to talk through them to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the definition of disability that we're going to be referencing this evening. So let's talk a little bit about reasonable accommodations. You know, what is a reasonable accommodation? So a reasonable accommodation is a modification or an adjustment to a job, the work environment, or the way things are generally done during the hiring process. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're not really going to focus on the hiring process. We're going to touch on it in a few different places, but we're not really going to focus on it. So these modifications, what they do is they enable an individual with a disability to have an equal opportunity, not only to get the job, but to successfully perform the job tasks to the same extent as people without the disabilities. And the ADA further requires reasonable accommodations as they relate to three aspects of employment. Number one is ensuring equal opportunity in the application process. So that might mean changing an interview location. And, you know, something reasonable to ask for that is if I'm an individual that I utilize a wheelchair, or maybe I use another assistive device to ambulate, perhaps a walker, a scooter, a cane, something like that. And I'm going into a job interview that's perhaps on the second floor of a building that doesn't include an elevator. Asking for a change in that interview space, it's a reasonable accommodation. That's a reasonable request. Also, modifying tests is a reasonable request. And what I mean by that is if I'm an individual with a visual impairment and I've been offered a test that's with what I would perceive to be tiny print, asking that potential employer to give me a test that maybe has larger font, larger writing material, larger print, that's also a reasonable request, right? Enabling qualified individuals with a disability to perform the essential functions of a job, number two. And then number three, making it possible for an employee with a disability to enjoy the equal privileges of employment. I think it's also very important to talk about reasonable accommodations. They're not special treatment. I think that's a very important item to mention right there. A reasonable accommodation is not special treatment, and we shouldn't think that way at all. And then finally, reasonable accommodations can benefit employees who don't have a disability. And so a couple of things that I think of immediately are ramps. So when I go out and about with my family, and I'm with my mom, and we have an opportunity to either use the stairwell or perhaps a ramp, we usually take the ramp because it's easier for my mom, who has a number of disabilities. It's easier for her to walk up a ramp, walk down a ramp, than it is to take a bunch of stairs, right? Accessible restrooms. I'm sure we've all been in a public restroom and we've seen that restroom that's usually located at the end of the stall that's a little bit larger. And then our ergonomic workstations. That's something that I think that's become very, very popular, very, very commonplace. So even individuals without a disability can certainly take advantage of some of the progress that we've made over the last many years in terms of the ADA. So what I'd like to do at this point is talk about some reasonable accommodations. And I want to make sure that we know that this list is certainly not all-inclusive. It's something that when I was preparing for this presentation, these are some of the items, some of the accommodations that came to mind. And some of the accommodations we're going to talk about today, this evening, are some that I've seen quite a few times. I'm sure Diane has seen them as well. And again, I would encourage Diane to jump in if she has any specific examples too. But we'll go ahead and get started. I've got a lot of talking points, so I apologize. Got a lot to say this evening, and I'll try to get through them as best as I can. So one of the things that I think about, the first thing on this slide that actually addresses is accessible parking. If an employer provides parking spaces to all of the personnel, then an accessible space must be provided to an employee with a disability, unless it would pose an undue hardship. And we're going to talk about undue hardship in just a little bit here. Parking may be a reasonable accommodation for an employee with a mobility disability, so in the form of a designated space. For instance, one closer to the building or that place of work. And that first come, first served policy may need to be amended in order to accommodate the parking needs of employees with disabilities. So acquiring or modifying equipment. This may include an ergonomic keyboard, perhaps, for someone who might have a repetitive motion injury. Customizing employment. This is an arrangement between a worker with a disability and employer that benefits both and that focuses, though, on the employer, or rather the strengths of the employee. And examples can include schedules, adjusted schedules, modified schedules, work from home agreements, supported employment and self-employment are also forms of customized employment. A job coach assists individuals with disabilities to find and keep a job. Job coaches also work with employers. They provide on-site support to individuals in order to help them acclimate to the workplace, learn their job duties, and they can even assist with the routines of getting to and leaving work. Job restructuring is when an employer modifies a job by removing one or more job responsibilities, bringing the demands of the job within the physical capacities of the disabled worker. So magnification, we've already touched on that a little bit this afternoon, or rather this evening. Magnification can be of a computer screen, or it could also be of a written material where an employee, or like I said earlier, perhaps an applicant might need something larger. Modifying workplace policy to allow for service animals. So for me, this has been really eye-opening, to be honest. I think for the longest time, when I thought of an individual using, a service animal, for a long while, I thought of individuals who had a visual impairment, because I think that was commonplace for a really, really long time. But that's been expanded to include so much more now. Service animals can assist people with musculoskeletal disorders, neurological impairments, psychological conditions. And I've read and learned a great deal over the last couple of years that some service animals, some dogs, they've been trained to find help or even assist with individuals who've had seizures or who have a seizure disorder, or even have diabetes. So it's truly an amazing progress that we've made. Modifying work schedules. So I see this probably more frequently than any other accommodation that we're going to talk about tonight. Modifying a work schedule is just having the employee and the employer talk through that work schedule and make some modifications to it, quite honestly. I've got a couple of examples of this one. I wanted to make sure I touched on this because it can be used in a couple of different ways. The first example that I have to provide is I was assisting an individual who had been awarded Social Security disability for cancer. It was a younger individual who'd been awarded for a stage 4 cancer. Thankfully, that individual received treatment and that individual improved and went into remission. She was thankful, of course, but she also wanted to get back to work. She had some little ones at home and she needed to put food on the table, right? And the Social Security disability benefit wasn't cutting it. So she decided that she wanted to go back to work. She enrolled in the program that we're going to talk about in just a bit. And she found her job. She found her dream job, actually. But sadly, her cancer recurred. She had a recurrence of that cancer. But so she didn't want to quit that job. Like I said, this was her dream job. This was something she was really excited about. And so she was reasonably concerned. And what we did is we had a discussion over the phone, and we talked about what's called an interactive process. And that's just basically having an open discussion with the employer. So I encouraged her to do that, and she did just that. We weren't really sure how this was going to be addressed, but ultimately what was determined is she would go into work in the morning and meet up with all of her other colleagues at that time. And when she had treatment days that she was going to be receiving a therapy or a treatment, she would leave work. She would go to the hospital or the clinic. She would receive that treatment. She would come back that day and she would continue working. So she started with her employees in the morning, but she ended up working later in the day. And it worked out for her. I'm glad to say that she's beat her cancer yet again. She's back into remission again. And she's continuing to work successfully. It's helped her, and it's helped her employer as well. The other example that I see quite a bit is individuals that have fatigue. And they might have fatigue due to an underlying illness. They may have experienced fatigue due to pain, any number of issues. But this other individual I helped with, she found a job that she also really enjoyed after having been awarded Social Security disability. And, she had a period where she recovered. She went back to work, like I said, and the interview was great. She received the job. She received the job offer. She was excited about the position. But then when she found out about the schedule, she knew immediately she was going to have a problem because it was an early shift. Morning fatigue was a major issue for her. So she tried the schedule. She wanted to give it a good try. She tried the schedule. And unfortunately, she just wasn't able to manage it. So I encouraged her before this becomes a problem. Let's make sure we talk to the supervisor. Reach out, talk to your supervisor in a confidential way. Let her know what's going on. So she did that. She talked with her supervisor. And, in this case, her company, the company that she worked for, allowed her to modify her schedule such that she didn't have to do that morning so early in the morning. She was able to actually start her work day a little bit later in the morning, late morning, early afternoon, if I can remember. And it worked out great. She's enjoyed that schedule since then, and her employer's been happy with her productivity since then. So again, I apologize. I did want to make sure we discussed a couple of those examples because, again, it really is something that I see on a very frequent basis. Continuing on, modifying workspace layout. So this might occur if an individual uses a wheelchair or some other type of assistive device, and it's determined that the workstation is just too tight a fit. So simply moving things around and allowing that employee a little extra space, whether it be getting into a workspace or maybe using the workspace and trying to have the wheelchair sit underneath that workspace. Maybe it's just too tight. So some simple modifications will allow for an individual to be productive. Offering remote work opportunities. So we've known for a very, very long time that individuals with disabilities have advocated for and really pushed hard for remote work as a reasonable accommodation, and it's been a real challenge. And it seems as though the pandemic has kind of been the catalyst at making this a more mainstream option. So, there's some definite concern, reasonable concern, that with the accessibility of the vaccine, we could see that the progress that's been made over the last year and a half or so could be reversed. Thankfully, we have some nice resources that both employers and employees can refer to, and we're going to talk about that reference here in just a bit. Reassignment to a vacant position. So this is really only required after determining that there's no effective accommodations, or rather no effective accommodations will enable the employee to perform the essential functions of his or her job. Or that all other reasonable accommodations would pose an undue hardship. And we have to keep in mind here that if you're an applicant, this accommodation isn't really something that you would be qualified to use, because the individual has to perform the essential functions of that position that he or she is applying for. Providing a quiet workspace, this would be the employer offering a quiet, distraction-free workspace. Maybe someone has an attention disorder, right? That sit-stand work option, that sit-stand workstation, it's also a very common accommodation that we see quite a bit here. I think that a lot of people are concerned about asking for that simply because they think that it's going to be super duper expensive for employers, when in reality, it's relatively inexpensive for most employers. And then to wind things out here, I've got screen reader technology such as JAWS, which stands for Job Access with Speech. So again, the list that we've talked about here briefly, this isn't all-inclusive. I want to make sure that everyone understands this isn't all-inclusive. And in fact, after I prepared this and for this presentation, this slide for this presentation, I also thought about some other accommodations, alternative lighting accommodations for individuals that might have migraines, or fragrance-free work environment for individuals that might have allergies. But I thought I'd just stick to what we have, but literally we could go on for a much longer period of time just going over these accommodations. So oftentimes, we think about reasonable accommodations, and I think a lot of employees are afraid to ask for one because they're afraid that there's going to be some extraordinary cost involved. And, reasonable accommodations generally cost very little and usually involve only minor changes to the work environment, the work schedule, or other work-related technology. And in fact, the Job Accommodation Network, which some of you may have already heard about, or JAN for short, they've consistently reported in employer surveys that most accommodations cost nothing to implement, while the rest of the accommodations generally has an average cost of about $500 to implement. And furthermore, the surveys at the Job Accommodation Network, the surveys have consistently shown that the benefits of providing these accommodations far outweigh the cost that's involved. Employers are allowed to retain valuable employees. These accommodations help to improve productivity and morale, and it reduces training costs, and it also improves company diversity. So this is a big deal. So I guess to further round out the slide, what I want to mention is that a reasonable accommodation can be just about anything. You just have to be able to provide the appropriate documentation and show that it's going to allow you the ability to perform the essential functions of the job at hand. Finally, we do have to be mindful that the accommodation, it can't cause an undue hardship for an employer. And so an undue hardship means significant difficulty or expense and focuses on the resources and circumstances of the particular employer in relationship to the cost or the difficulty of providing that specific accommodation. So let's talk about, how do you ask for a reasonable accommodation? Again, this is one of the 3 themes that I talked about in that Forbes article. So, I think it's important that I think it's important for everybody to know that you can address that requested accommodation to any number of people in your company. But I think what's most important is that you begin with your supervisor. Your immediate supervisor is going to be the person who already knows you, who knows the great things that you bring to not only the workforce, but that job specifically, right? They're going to recognize the great asset you are as an employee. But they're also going to recognize some of the obstacles. They're more likely to recognize some of the obstacles that you may encounter on a day-to-day basis that could hinder your performance. It's also best to talk to that point person before your performance suffers. Under the ADA, employers don't have to rescind discipline or negative performance reviews that were received prior to the request for the accommodation, even if the issue of disability related to the employer, even if the issue about the disability was related to the employer and they knew about it. So again, it's important to communicate this kind of information as quickly as possible. Request for a reasonable accommodation doesn't have to be in writing. You can do this face-to-face. You can have a general conversation, but it really needs to be in a quiet and enclosed space. This is something that you don't want your colleagues, your immediate coworkers to hear because it is confidential information. You don't want other people to hear what's going on. It's not their business. And really what we're doing here is we're asking for an adjustment or a change at work for a reason related to a medical condition. You don't have to use the word reasonable accommodation. You don't have to use the word interactive process. Really, we would encourage you to use just plain English, something that's comfortable for you to use. And finally, you're not legally obligated to disclose that official diagnosis to your employer. Instead, you simply have to explain that the accommodation that you're asking for, that you're requesting, is related to a medical condition. So how do you go about documenting for a reasonable accommodation? Some employers may request documentation, some may not. It just depends on your employer. Documentation should describe the nature, the severity, the duration, the activity limit, and substantiate why the accommodation is needed. This documentation should be completed by a doctor, by a nurse, a licensed mental health professional, maybe even a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. I think the most important thing to keep in mind here, and if there is an underlying theme to this entire presentation, it really should be about communication. If documentation is necessary, find out what specific information is needed. I've given some information here in terms of what should be described, but your employer might want something more specific. So just again, I think again, the underlying theme today, this evening, is communication. So what I'd like to address now are some additional examples. I went through two earlier in the presentation that talked about modifying a workplace schedule. But we've got some more, and these are examples that we've encountered, that we've handled here at Allsup Employment Services. So just to talk a little bit through these, we'll kind of go by color because the boxes on the screen is by color. So that first box, the box all the way on the left, that purple box, was the first situation that we assisted through. And keep in mind, each of these examples that I'm going to be talking through this evening, these are individuals who had already been through the Social Security disability application process and had been awarded Social Security disability. So they've encountered some sort of stability in their medical condition and decided to return to work, and that's where we came in. So that purple box, that first example, we'd assisted a traveling nurse who'd been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She'd returned to work. She was doing great. She was happy. She was thrilled to be back at work, but she had a recent exacerbation that took her out of the workforce for just a bit of time. She wanted to return to work, but she had some ongoing weakness issues, some fatigue resulting in causing her to have some difficulty with lifting patients. She wasn't really sure what type of accommodations to ask for, but we at Allsup Employment Services encouraged her to go in and talk with her employer, be open-minded. Let's see what we can come up with. And ultimately, the employer decided to assign this traveling nurse to clients who were more mobile. And they even looked at purchasing patient lifts. So this particular individual was able to continue working with some very reasonable accommodations that were provided by her employer. The second example, which is in the blue box, we assisted an accountant who'd been diagnosed with cancer. Once again, this individual had applied for Social Security disability, been awarded, and decided to return to work. What happened was, and much like the example that I provided earlier, this particular accountant, that cancer had recurred. Once again, didn't want to leave the job, didn't want to resign, enjoyed working very, very much. So he didn't want to resign. So once again, we talked through this situation. What can we do, and how can we continue? How can we continue to make this work? And so we talked with him, and he went to his supervisor, explained the situation, and we thought that maybe we could modify that work schedule, much like that example I talked about earlier today. And instead of modifying the schedule, the employer allowed this accountant to work remotely. And further, the employer provided this individual with a laptop. So, you know, everybody was excited. Our client had the ability to continue working, and the employer didn't lose a valued employee. It was really a win-win situation. The third box, the green box, the school custodian with an injured hip. This was an individual that had some orthopedic issues, been awarded Social Security disability, returned to work through our assistance, and he had an injury on the job. He fell, slipped, injured his hip. He wanted to get back to the school as quickly as possible. He talked with his doctor, and the doctor was okay with him going back to work, but there was a limitation. He was no longer able to climb ladders. So again, this school custodian really didn't know what to do, talked with one of our case managers, ultimately went to his supervisor and explained the situation. I want to get back to work. I want to be back at school. I want to be back with the kids. I just can't do any more ladders. So after they talked with the employer, what the supervisor decided to do is they were going to restructure his job. And they altogether removed any type of ladder climbing from his job responsibilities. And he was thrilled about it because he got to spend a lot of time with the kids, got to be back at work and spend some time with the kids. And this final example that we have here, which is the fourth box, it's in orange. We had another case manager who had another individual with some orthopedic issues. She'd also been awarded Social Security disability. She worked as a cashier, and she was excited to get back to work as a cashier. But she also had a long-standing history of knee pain, and she decided she couldn't manage the knee pain any longer. And she decided that she was going to pursue knee replacement surgery. Once again, she wanted to get back to work. She needed to get back to work for financial reasons. So she went to her doctor and talked with her doctor. And the doctor decided that she could return to work, but she had some standing limitations. She had some standing restrictions. And so we talked her through those restrictions. She had a nice conversation with her supervisor, and the employer provided her with a lean stool, a stand lean stool, such that she had the ability to stand when she could, and when she felt those restrictions coming on, she could lean. She could use that stool such that she wasn't applying all of that pressure to her knee. So she was able to continue working as well and doing a great job for her employer too. So these are some really nice success stories that I'm excited to be able to share with you all tonight. We're also going to talk about how to follow up. How do you follow up when you ask for an accommodation? Some employers will be satisfied with the information you provide in terms of that documentation. You're not going to need anything else, right? Other employers may require more or different documentation. So again, that underlying theme is all about communication. Make sure to maintain that open line of communication with your employer. Find out exactly what additional documentation is needed. What are we looking for? What's lacking? Because you want to be able to come back to the table with what your employer is looking for. And keep in mind, it might be tempting for some employers to say, sign this release form and we'll go get the information from your medical specialist. Signing a medical release should be avoided at all costs, because that medical release could allow your employer to get years worth of your medical records. And they're going to see information in there that's not applicable, that doesn't apply towards that accommodation. That should be avoided at all costs. And finally, if additional documentation is needed, I want everyone to understand that the EEOC does not offer guidance in terms of response times. So what that means is if your employer is looking for some more information from your doctor and they're giving you, say, 7 days to reply, but you know that your doctor won't be able to reply or assist you within 7 days, or maybe you know that it takes you more like 3 weeks to even get in and have your doctor sign or fill out anything. Again, the underlying theme is communication. Communicate with your employer as soon as you can. That way, you let him or her know, you let your supervisor know that it's going to take you a little more time than 7 days and that you would appreciate very much an extension. But the sooner you get that information, the sooner you communicate that information with your employer, the the better off everybody's going to be. So talked a little bit about a few minutes ago regarding resource material, resource information. So we're going to talk about resources. I'm not sure if anyone else on this call attending this presentation is familiar with JAN, which stands for the Job Accommodation Network. But this is a resource that we literally use almost daily, if not daily. Someone in the company is using this resource daily. JAN has been around for 35 years or so, and JAN really is the go-to resource when it comes to free, expert, confidential information and assistance regarding accommodations and disability employment guidance. JAN is staffed with employment specialists who are true leaders and innovators when it comes to disability employment topics and issues. They offer free information to employees and employers alike. And, those services include one-on-one consultation, and it's free, right? Ask JAN specialists. They can be reached by phone. They can be reached via text, Skype, email, and live chat. I know JAN also provides newsletters. And I just actually received their fourth quarter edition. I don't know, maybe end of October. And they have some amazing events coming up, including an event on accommodation solutions for individuals with autoimmune disorders. So for me, I'm going to attend that. And I would encourage everyone on this call to check those events out and check that site out if you're not already familiar with JAN. Finally, just want to mention that JAN is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy. So this truly is a trusted site. So accommodations matter. Accommodations absolutely matter when you're attempting to return to work. And it's okay to make that transition gradually, right? We've seen people jump in with both feet first to a full-time job after having been out of the workforce for 5, 10, even 15 years, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So I don't want anyone to think that they have to jump in full-time. You can make that transition gradually. It's important to be gradual about it. Listen to your body. People with disabilities should understand that the ADA provides important protections, and federal regulations are a part of the picture for both employees and employers alike. So talking about federal regulations and protections, the government's also developed a program that allows individuals receiving Social Security disability insurance benefits an opportunity to try to return to work without having an immediate fear of losing their benefits. And the Ticket to Work program, it's a federal program that's part of the SSDI benefits package. So most people think that when they're awarded Social Security disability insurance benefits, it stops at that monthly benefit, that monthly dollar figure, when that's not true at all. The benefit also allows you health insurance services in addition to return to work assistance. It's part of that benefits package. The Ticket to Work program is completely free and it's completely voluntary, and it's offered to anyone receiving a Social Security disability insurance benefit that's aged between 18 and 64. The program offers a number of very powerful work incentives that assist people in returning to work. The program, which again, every time I have an opportunity to say it, I am, The program is free and voluntary, completely free and voluntary, and it allows participants to earn unlimited income while receiving that monthly benefit for about a year. It allows you to keep and actually extend your Medicare benefits while working, and it protects you from continuing disability reviews, otherwise known as CDRs. And if you continue into the program, it allows you the opportunity to become eligible for the disability benefit again, even if you become unable to work again. So what we have found is that individuals receiving Social Security disability benefits, they're often afraid to return to work, usually for one of three reasons. Number one, individuals receiving that Social Security disability insurance benefit, they're afraid to get back to work because once they return to work, they're going to lose their Medicare. That's one of the big myths about returning to work while on SSDI. The second one is people are afraid that once they return to work, Social Security is going to conduct that continuing disability review and they're going to take their benefits away. So that's another myth that most folks think about. And that third fear, that third myth, if you will, people are often afraid that if their benefit payments are eventually paused because they've returned to work successfully, but they have to stop working again, they believe that they're going to have to apply for the disability benefit all over again. And for some people, that process can literally take years. And as a result, they think, I'm not going to try for that again. I can't go without having a benefit for that long again. I just can't do it. So the Ticket to Work program was designed with these things in mind. And it was really designed to help people be put at ease when they attempt to go back to work. So some of the incentives that's offered really help to dispel those concerns. The program's comprised of 3 phases, right? And it begins with the trial work period. And that really allows you to test your ability to work and earn 2 sources of income for about a year. So you'll get your full Social Security disability benefit on top of your paycheck through your new employer. The second phase is the extended period of eligibility. And during this 36-month span of time, an employee has the ability to kind of go on and off of the disability benefit based on his or her gross monthly income rather. And then the third phase of the program is referred to as expedited reinstatement, or EXR, and it's a 5-year span of time that kicks in once your disability benefits are terminated because you've successfully returned to work. What this EXR allows you to do is, should you have to go back out of the workforce due to the same or similar condition that allowed you on disability to begin with, you have the ability to file an EXR, an expedited reinstatement, with Social Security. And the best part about this particular phase is that Social Security is going to pay you 6 months of provisional disability payments while they take care of their paperwork. On top of that, like I said, Medicare coverage continues for over 7 years after you complete your trial work period. And again, that's only if you complete the trial work period. And finally, if you're enrolled in the program, you're doing well, you're making progress, Social Security will exempt you from those continuing disability reviews. So how is this Ticket to Work thing beneficial? There's many benefits of participating in the program. And like I said earlier, I will always shout from the top of my lungs, this is a free program. This is absolutely free. It's a voluntary program. And it allows you to explore, your work options and ultimately see if you can get back to work. It allows you to ease back into the workforce as your medical condition improves. It can also improve your financial position. And finally, should you decide to participate, it allows you to receive support and guidance from an employment network. So I just used a couple of words that I haven't this entire presentation, and that is employment network. An employment network is an organization or service that's approved by the Social Security Administration. And in order to take full advantage of all the benefits of the Ticket to Work program, you have to assign your ticket to an employment network to help you fully benefit. And again, an employment network is going to provide all kinds of assistance to you completely free. There's absolutely no charge to work with an employment network. And there's all kinds of employment networks available to beneficiaries out there. And I would encourage anyone that's interested or that's heard about the program or that wants to learn anything more about the program to visit choosework.ssa.gov. This is a site that's run by the Social Security Administration, and you can find help. You can find an employment network, or you can find another agency that can assist you in using the Ticket to Work program. So finally, we've gone through a lot of information this evening, and I truly hope that you walk away this evening with more information now than you did maybe an hour ago. So at this time, what I would like to do is just pass it back to Amy and Becca.
Okay, thank you very much. What I can say for sure is I've learned a lot tonight, a lot more than I knew, which is going to be helpful to me in my position at the Lupus Foundation. So I just want to thank you for that, because you've made me better at my job, I think. So I want to open this up now for questions. We've had a few during your presentation, but if anyone who's on the call has a specific question that we can try to answer, just remember that they can't, there might be some special circumstances that they will not be able to answer, but I'll go ahead and ask a few, and you can, please feel free, if you're not familiar, there's a question section over on your dashboard to the right, and you can just ask a question there. So the first question is, I think they're talking about ADA and at-will states. So I'm not quite sure I know what the question is, but it says, how does the ADA play with an at-will state? I'm not sure. Do you know what that means, or should we ask for clarification?
Yeah, I think maybe asking for clarification.
Okay.
Unless Diane, unless you want to try to make a stab at it, I'm not quite sure.
No, I'd definitely like some clarification.
Okay. I mean, my only guess is that they're saying, if you're asking for an accommodation and they fire you because you've asked for an accommodation, saying that, well, it's an at-will state. We hear that a lot, that it's an at-will state, so they can fire you for any reason or no reason at all. Yes, and she said that is exactly what she was asking. So if you ask for an accommodation and then you get fired, what kind of legal action can you take?
Well, I absolutely think there is definitely legal action that you can take, because there has to be, definitely reasons for the termination from that employee. But ask for an accommodation, as long as it's a reasonable accommodation, that employer, as long as it doesn't pose an undue hardship, should be able to accommodate. So it may be case by case, and this individual who may be asking may have specific examples. But another, as Paula talked a lot about, Jan is a great resource to contact regarding reasonable accommodations.
And that is a great resource.
Paula's point, Paula did an outstanding presentation. It's all about and talking with your employer when you're requesting an accommodation. So the first thing you do is talk about the accommodation, request the accommodation is being terminated for an at-will. When they're asking for a reasonable accommodation, they can definitely follow up, and I would definitely point them to Jan.
Yeah, that's a great resource. I hope everybody has written that down, because I'm going to go check it out after this is over. So another person's asking a question, and I might even be able to answer this, but how do you modify the schedule for somebody with lupus? Because lupus is one of those diseases where some days you feel great and other days not so great. So some of it might be for you, I would think, to think for yourself, what kind of an accommodation you might need on those days. But I would think for sure that the whole concept, like Paula said, we're all working from home, at least if you have a job where you're able to work from home. So that might be the accommodation that you ask for. If I wake up and I'm not feeling well, not everybody has a job where they can work from home, obviously, but any other thoughts about for someone like that who might not feel well from one day to the next?
I do have one thought, and then I'd obviously open up to Diane. That is something that I looked at in terms of fatigue, and how do you manage fatigue or pain, or, you know, whatever that case might be, whatever that symptom might be. You know, and I'm thinking of, and not every employer is going to offer this, of course, but some employers actually offer a quiet room, a quiet space. I know the company that I work for, when they remodeled, kind of like the downtime, like the kitchen area. It was a pretty large space, and they actually divided a small portion of that space off as a quiet space, and they had allowed individuals to go in on their breaks and take a nap, right? You know, and I would also recommend, you know, just providing frequent breaks throughout the day. You know, if sometimes people have shift work. You know, and sometimes with shift work, you have to look at optimizing that schedule, not just making sure that somebody's in that slot and can fill that slot for the day, but you also have to make sure that the folks that's working for you, that's doing the job, is healthy and well. So they have to optimize the work schedule. You know, and I'd also say that you can discourage people from working off hours, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. I think when you work remotely, you get into that habit of, I work from 7 to 3:30, and then it's 7 to 4 o'clock, and then it's 7 to 4:30, and then it's 7 to 5 o'clock. And that just continues on and on and on, and that will exhaust anybody. And I just don't think that that kind of schedule is sustainable. So we have to be mindful of our own bodies and listen to our own bodies. I don't know, Diane, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I would agree with that, Paula. The other thing, I would definitely have communication with your supervisor in terms of, you know, your schedule, because it may adjust on a daily basis. As long as you communicate with your supervisor and you're all in agreement, I think it absolutely can move out.
So I think this question got answered, so I'm not going to ask, because they were asking some questions about disability and going back to work, and I think you answered a lot of those questions. Actually, we had a lot of people ask pre-questions, and I think you've answered almost all of them in your presentation, which is so great. But another question that we had, I think people are concerned about, or have had the experience before, of that conversation not going as well with their employer. You know, being nervous about starting that conversation and then it not going as well, or not, you know, we all don't have as receptive of employers as we would like to. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that when your employer isn't as receptive. I mean, some people work for really small companies. Does all of this apply to smaller companies?
Yeah, I would say the ADA applies to any employer with 15 or more employees. I saw a point that was done by Jan, and I think that this study went a little bit earlier, but 65% of the employers reported that accommodations cost absolutely nothing. And it's really empowering that disabled worker to have that conversation, because I really truly believe employers want to accommodate. Paula talked about the values of keeping disabled workers on board, you know, morale, productivity, job retention. You know, it's there. They just need to have the confidence. And I completely understand that people are hesitant. Disabled workers are hesitant because, you know, stereotypes on that. But it's really having those conversations with that immediate supervisor and asking for that request. To Paula's point again, those accommodations cost absolutely nothing.
I'll mention a couple of things that we've seen that because people are asking about accommodations again for people with lupus, and a couple of things that we've seen go well and go not so well when they've asked for things, but simple things certainly can be that the opportunity to be able to work from home. But for some people with lupus, and that some of you on our webinar tonight can relate to this, being around bright lights, fluorescent lights, can just be just as dangerous as being in sunlight for people with lupus. And so that might be something, if you're coming home every day from work and you feel horrible, it might be because of those fluorescent lighting. And so it might be something to ask your employer about. Is there some way that you can work in an area that doesn't have those harsh lights, or get some other kind of lighting into your workspace? Again, I know that's not possible for everybody if you work at a grocery store or something, but that might be something that you might want to think about as an accommodation if you find yourself not feeling well in an office or in a situation like that. And I think we've had a couple of our lupus patients tell us that once they had that, they started the conversation, they came with information about why it was difficult, if these were obviously employers who knew that they had lupus, and they were very accommodating once they understood that, they were going to have a better employee, a better, employee who was better able to work and do well at their job if an accommodation was made. Okay, so we have one. If anybody else has any more questions, I have one more question here, and we're kind of getting past our time here. So, but if anybody has any more questions, any last minute questions, feel free to just pop it into the question section. So a couple of people are asking about, this person said, I feel I lost a job because I made so many mistakes when I was requesting for accommodations at my job. And just is curious, and again, I think you've addressed this, but do you have any specific tips for how to start that conversation so that it starts off on the right foot?
Paula, I know you talked about during presentations, so I don't know if you want to take that one about the request.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to start with your supervisor, and I know it's a scary thing. Accommodations are kind of like this abstract thing. At least that's the way I used to look at accommodations, because every person is so different, and every accommodation is going to be so different. So for me, I think the most important thing, again, that underlying theme is communication. The sooner that you can, the sooner you talk to your supervisor, again, your supervisor is going to be the one who knows you. They're going to know all of the positive attributes that you have to bring to the table. They're going to know all of the positive characteristics, all of the positive skills that you're going to bring to a position, right? They're also, like I said, they're also going to know some of your obstacles. They're going to see those things first off. And I think it's important to talk with your supervisor as quickly as you realize there's going to be a problem. Like I said, with the ADA, if you're given some type of disciplinary action, or if you're provided with a poor performance evaluation, a negative performance evaluation, which I'm sure for a lot of us on this call is new for us, unfortunately, your employer doesn't have to redact that or rescind those comments. They just don't have to. So I think it's important, before you allow your work performance to be hindered, you really need to make those comments. You really need to have those conversations with your employer. And again, it doesn't have to be verbal. This doesn't have to be a formal, official, come in with a suit and tie or, kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. This is you being you. You have a lot to bring to any job that you have, any career, any position. They're lucky to have you. And if I could say that, an employer is going to be lucky to have any one of us. And I think it's really about just providing that communication, the ability to communicate with your supervisor in the way that you feel most comfortable. So if it's in writing, that's okay. If it's a face-to-face, that's okay too. Just make sure it's behind closed doors, because it's not anyone else's business what's going on with your work life. Diane, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on top of that.
I was just going to add, and I think you touched on it, Paul, in your presentation. I mean, that employer is looking at the indirect and the direct costs associated with a disability. And, you know, if you bring someone back, they know the work schedule. They know the workflows, processes, and procedures. That employer does not have to hire temporary employees. They don't have to. So, I mean, it's a win-win to bring someone back with a disability by making some simple accommodations.
So very good advice for everyone. Don't put it off. Don't wait. You know, start that conversation in a way that's comfortable for you. Well, I just want to thank you all so much. This was, like I said, I think this was extremely informative. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure all of you on the webinar tonight have learned a lot as well. So thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to, I'm going to check out some of that information right away. So thank you so much, Paula and Diane. And thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a nice evening.
Thanks so much. Good night.
You.
Bye.